All right, well, hello, my name is Steve Fulmer. I am doing a presentation today about the harms of pornography, and today's video lesson, essentially, what I want to do is I'm going to spend a lot of time today going over the issues, the fundamental core concepts and things to help us understand why things like pornography can be a harm to people and harm to their health and harm to their livelihood. So again, quite a bit of the first part of this video is going to just be an explanation of kind of how things work in our reward system and in our brains and a lot of our biology. And again, that's kind of the core concept of this discussion is let's go and talk about the biology of this, and again, then talk about the harmful effects of this. Again, this is a video that's going to be about, again, a lot of biology, but we're going to be talking about and discussing pornography. So I do want you to understand that we are going to have those discussions today. If that is something that is you don't want to hear about or you don't want to listen to, I can totally understand that. So, but again, just kind of giving a trigger warning and having you guys understand that what the scope of the discussion is today. So let's get right into it. So first thing is we want to go over some main concepts, of the body, and basically, again, try to lay this foundation understanding of why this is an issue. So core concept number one is work equals growth. So what we have to understand is the more work that we put into a system, the better it's going to grow. And if we don't put any work into a system, then it's not going to grow. In fact, it's going to decay. In fact, second law of thermodynamics will always tell you that it takes work just to maintain a system. You have to put a lot of work into things just to maintain. If you don't put any work into it, you're not going to grow. So core concept number one, we got to put in work. Two, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. That's something we do as humans. We're always constantly trying to seek pleasure. We're trying to avoid pain. Third concept, adapt to pleasure and pain. This is going to be the thing that we're going to really discuss a lot and try to double down on today for your understandings, again, to lay that foundation of why we're doing, or again, why something like pornography and other addictive substances and behaviors can really be harmful to you. And what that really gets down to is we have to figure out what is good and what is bad. So that is a whole big part of adaptation to humankind. So if you imagine when you were young and you were maybe just a child and you had something painful happen to you, well, you had to adapt to pain and adapt to pleasure over time so we can succeed and thrive as humans. So one thing I try to understand is if you were that kid and you remember like you bumped your head on something and that was your 10 pain. I like to quantify things as 0 being like the lowest, nothing, 10 being the worst. So we're always trying to figure out what's 0 to 10 and where does it fit in that range. Well, if 10 is your worst, and again, as a kid, 10 was your worst pain when you got hit in the head, well, think about that as a kid and think about the pains that you've had now as an adult. And think about what your life would be like if you constantly walked around and every time you bumped your head or bumped into something, that was a 10 pain. That was so horrible and so excruciating to you. Think about how miserable your life would be. So this adaptation that we do to pleasure and to pain is your ability to say, look, I need to scale this in. Once I make a new 10, I'm basically ready to make room for the next 10 that's coming. And I have to do that to adapt to my environment. So it's really, really important that you understand that. Sometimes thinking about it through the lens of pain is a little bit easier way to kind of understand that concept and general idea. So let's go to the pleasure side of this. So it's the same kind of thing. Whatever was most pleasurable to you, again, say if that happened as a kid, say you're eating something and you eat a really sugary cereal and you're like, man, this tastes absolutely wonderful. Well, if that was your 10, right, that can't be the 10 for the rest of your life. Because every time you eat cereal or you eat something else, you don't know what's good from really good. You don't know, again, on the pain side, you don't know what's bad from really bad. So you have to adapt to things and you have to scale to things. You have to fit things accordingly. So that is a big part of our mechanism. That's what we're constantly doing as humans and evolving over time with. So let's talk about the mechanisms of adaptation. How does this work? How do things, increase? How do we figure out how things are 10s and 9s and 8s? And then again, how do we adapt to that? Well, I'd like to look at this chart really quick as something that, since we're talking about pleasure and something that's rewarding, like pornography, we're talking about something that is rewarding. If we look at reward over time, So something that as we go along and we have these events, sometimes we get to these peaks and we have these kind of troughs. And these things are, more rewarding than those things or those points in time. But then we reach these things that are extremely rewarding, and then we go back, have some more pain, and then again, just kind of go steady state, and we just have some type of minimalist or medium type of reward over time. What we're trying to get at is your body is going to look at these things and say, hey, what's most important here? What really sticks out? And it's really going to be this event that happened there. It's going to say, hey, yeah, I love the reward for that. I'm again seeking pleasure, so I'm seeking that reward. I'm trying to avoid pain. I want to do that thing again, whatever it is. And so your body literally, again, with dopamine, which is your motivational neurotransmitter, basically it's the motivation that you have for your body to say, again, hey, look, I love that reward. I love that thing. Enter in, and again, let's flood in some dopamine because we want to remember this thing and we want to do it again. Okay, that was needed and has been needed for our survival. Like back in the hunter-gatherer days, when we're trying to get food and the necessary things we need for our bodies just to survive, well, we had to work really hard. And that gets kind of back to core concept one. If we're getting food, and again, back in those days of hunter-gatherer, we had to work and work constantly. And we needed some motivation to keep putting in that work to finally get a reward so that we could survive. So we could go get food so we could survive. And so dopamine, or essentially the reward, just kind of builds up and builds up and builds up until you get to this event where, say, you eat something, okay, which is a very pleasurable thing, and again, a very rewarding thing. Your body's going to reward you for it. But the dopamine is there just to motivate you to go do those things, okay? So that's really, really important to note. And that really gets back again to the adaptation portion here, okay? Well, how are we adapting to this? Because again, if everything's a 10, then you're going to be motivated to do everything. Dopamine is going to tell you, do this, do that, do this, do that. But you have to adapt and scale this to something. What's a 10? What's a 9? What's an 8, 7, so on and so forth. So the mechanisms that do that is we have to go, well, what is going to actually just increase dopamine? How do we increase the dopamine amounts? So let's jump down to this little picture here, because I want to give you guys a better visual representation of what's actually going on. So one thing that's going here, this is your neurons. These are two different neurons. It's called a pre-neuron, basically, and a post-neuron, or a pre-synapse and a post-synapse. And basically the dopamine is going to need to be transferred. That's why it's called a neurotransmitter. It's going to be transferred, basically, or transmitted from one neuron to the next. Okay, so we have all this dopamine in here in these vesicles. And if something releases dopamine, okay, these dopamine particles come out here and they kind of float out here in this cleft, and then these receptors pick them up, the dopamine comes in here, and then it shoots on down through that neuron, and then it goes to the neuron number 3, neuron number 4, and so on and so forth throughout the brain, and it happens very quickly. Okay, this is a very, very fast process. But the thing is, the more dopamine we get, the more we are motivated to do that. So things that increase the dopamine, okay, are going to come out here and we're going to send more of it through. You can imagine if we said, let one piece of dopamine come out through here, one of these receptors says, oh, okay, I'll take that one piece of dopamine and send it on. That's going to be like, again, your one. You'll be motivated for it, but it's not that high of motivation as if you had 10 pieces of dopamine, right? Molecules of dopamine that come out here, hit all these 10 receptors, and then get flooded through. Okay, so that's the difference in this. But what makes this increase in dopamine is typically stuff that's new and novel. I wrote RPE here because that also is a big factor into this. It's called the reward projected error, or excuse me, reward predicted error. That basically is a mechanism to say, look, if we are experiencing something that really isn't new and really isn't novel, or again, kind of the thing is like the first time, imagine the first time somebody smoked a cigarette and it was very new and it was very novel and they didn't know what to expect for this. They couldn't predict what kind of reward this was going to be. And so they got the reward from it. It was very stimulating, kind of like they hit this peak here. And then the dopamine kicks in and says, oh, you really like that. And oh, that was much better, much more rewarding than we expected. So you get this huge surge of dopamine. Well, that was your first hit, right? And that may have been your first drug. That may have been your first drink of alcohol. It's your first whatever. And that gives you that peak. Now, the second time you do it, the 5th time you do it, the 10th time you do it, that prediction, okay, it starts saying, well, actually, we kind of know what reward we're going to get, so we don't release as much dopamine. And so we start lowering it. It's not new, it's not novel. We can predict how much is coming. The dopamine gets released. So if it released 10 before, well, now it's maybe a 9 or an 8 or a 7 or a 6 or 5. Okay, it starts moving its way down again because we have to adapt. It can't be this thing that always, right, every time you do it gives you a 10. It has to scale it in, and it has to try to fit that your body's adapting and saying, well, yeah, that felt good, but hey, maybe that wasn't more important than eating. Hey, maybe that wasn't more important than sex. Hey, that wasn't more important than some of these other things that you have to do. And I want to let you know it's better, but it's not that much better. And that's your way, and that's your body's way of adapting. So again, normally with normal usage and things, we can just basically say, look, we can take something like a cigarette, and over time you smoke the same thing. Now let's go to pornography. If it's pornography and you watch, say, the same scene, well, yeah, you may get a peak here, but the next time you watch it, you may get a peak here, and you may get a peak here, and you may get a peak here the next time, the next time, the next time. It goes down and down and down every time you watch it, because again, it's not new anymore, it's not novel, and we can predict the amount of reward that's coming from this, and your body can be pretty spot on. So if we do that under normal circumstances, again, we can maintain and we can adapt pretty well. But the problem is, on that level, with pornography, something like that, it's not the same scene that you're watching every time. This is now, in today's day and age, in high-speed internet, you are seeing new videos, new people, new things. It's constant new, it's constant novelty. It's constantly, I didn't predict this, okay, or I didn't predict all of it, and it's very, very enticing, and it releases a lot of dopamine. Well, then that starts becoming problematic, because now we're getting so much dopamine and so many peaks all the time. That's what our body, again, we're going to start to be motivated to do and to crave. And say these are things like eating, maybe again doing hard work and getting a little bit of pain, and then some exercise, and we get some endorphins and get a little bit of reward. These things start to become something that we are not that motivated to do. And so I'm going to imagine this line here, this marker, is something that says above this we're motivated to do, below this baseline we're not motivated to do. Well, if we're down here, these things are still motivating for us to do. Again, the eating, possibly exercise, maybe reading a book, stuff like that. But once we start flooding in a lot of dopamine, and we're constantly looking for all these peaks that look like this, that baseline starts moving up. And now these things below the baseline start to become less appealing. We're a lot less motivated, if motivated at all, to do them, which is a major problem. So what our body starts doing now is going to this mechanism of adaptation and saying, okay, well, I need to decrease the transmission, because now you're giving me all these spikes constantly all the time. And these things that normally are rewarding to you are not motivating to you anymore. In fact, they start decreasing. So what happened, again, let's just hit this point home. Say you had something that was normally a 5, and we had this 10 in here, right? From going from left to right, this was our 10. All of a sudden we hit this new spike. Now that's our new 10, okay? That's our new 10, and this basically makes this old 10 that was here, it drops it down to maybe a 9 or maybe an 8. And these other norms here, they drop down as well. Now they're a 4, or they go to a 3 or a 2. And again, the problem is, once we keep adding new novelty and new things in, we just keep doing this. We take the old 10 and make it a 9. Take the old 9, make it an 8. Okay, and we start moving things down. And again, that increases this baseline. So now things, again, don't look as motivating as these constant spikes you get. And so that is going to cause your body to go through that loop and need to put in this other mechanism to say, hey, look, you're constantly flooding me with dopamine. And the problem is, you're not putting in any work. You're just getting this dopamine for nothing. No work. Again, back in hunter-gatherer days, you had to put in all this work to get a little bit of dopamine. And now you're getting dopamine for nothing. And this is a problem, because now we're focused on, hey, I get these big surges of dopamine and these big rewards for doing little or no work. And again, hunting for food, gathering food, surviving, doing those normal mechanisms, they're not appealing anymore. They're not motivating, and that's a problem. So now we say, okay, we're going to decrease the transmission. We're going to decrease the ability for you to get all this dopamine. But that comes with a problem, because what we start doing is we start lowering, in this case, we start removing receptors. So where you have 10 here, you start having 9 and 8 and 7 and 6 and 5. And then that way, the dopamine that was coming in that say was 10 comes in here. You have 10 pieces of dopamine, but now you've only got 5 receptors. So only 5 can pass through at the same amount of time, which means that the things that were smaller here now too, that were lower amounts of dopamine, as we get lower receptors, also are affected, and they don't get across as much. So again, it's our way to adapt. But now the things that we start basically building a tolerance, the things that were really, really good, again, before, or even just mildly good, start getting worse and worse and worse. And we basically start funneling our attention and our motivation to the things that reward us the most efficiently. And unfortunately, those things are typically stuff that we don't put any work into. Therefore, we don't have any growth, and we stay where we're at. We don't get better with things. How does that affect us? How does that affect our physical health? Well, like I said, if you're looking to work out and you want to take pain before you get pleasure, before you get any endorphins or reward there, and it's slow growth over time, you're not going to be motivated to do it. It's more motivating to do something that gives you a quick, instantaneous reward for little or no work. And so you focus your life on those things. So we take a hit to our physical health, our intellectual health. How does that affect it? Well, if you want to study, if you need to read a book, okay, if you need to do, again, these things that are mundane, and that baseline is now up here because of these adaptations that you've had to make, they seem a lot less motivating. It's a lot less interesting to sit down and read a book when you can sit down and watch endless amounts, thousands of years actually, of pornography. Again, that gives you new novel content just like that each and every time. So it's going to take away from your intellectual health. Okay, and we actually see that in brain scans where you look at the gray matter in the brain and the prefrontal cortex. Those brains actually start losing gray matter and losing the ability to actually think and look through things intellectually and cognitively, logically. So you lose a lot of brain health as well. Emotionally, I think and this is kind of ties together emotionally and socially. There's a podcaster, his name is Theo Vaughn. I think he's a pretty popular person today. This is a pretty common story especially for young men, where they look at, they want to go out on a date. Like he talks about, I want to go out on a date with this person and I'm really excited about it. But what's happening is, because they're sitting there looking at pornography, which is something that just involves mainly pleasure, and that rewards typically men the most, they're looking at this like, hey, if I go out on a date, if I'm just trying to get pleasure, I'm not looking for an emotional connection with somebody, I'm just looking for pleasure. They start ruining their emotional health. Okay, they start focusing on, I just want to be with this woman because I'm just looking for sex and I'm just looking for pleasure. I'm just looking to get what I see in pornography, and it starts to ruin their emotional health. They become less emotionally detached. They start viewing things as mainly women, mainly more as just objects. I'm just trying to objectify and do the things that I'm seeing in pornography, and I'm losing that perspective on life. And therefore, again, you're losing your emotional health. You're no longer, again, rewarded, and you're not looking for a reward of oxytocin and connection and bonding with somebody. And when it comes to actual sex, you're not looking for intimacy in that connection. You're just looking for a quick thrill. Again, something that you're seeing in pornography, and it's ruining that emotional health and connection with those people. Socially, then what, again, Theo talks about is, I'm going to go out on a date with this gal, but, I think instead of putting in all this work to try to get to this pleasure, to only do pleasure, I'm just going to stay at home and I'm just going to watch porn and masturbate, essentially. Because that is a reliable thing for me to do. I can get the pleasure anytime I want. Porn's available 24/7, 365, and for free. And nobody knows I have to do it. Nobody knows I'm doing it. I'm not accountable to this. I'm completely anonymous. So if all I'm looking for is pleasure, I'm not looking for anything else, I'm just going to stay at home and do that. So it ruins, again, and it hurts your social life. You're not going out and interacting, going on dates, trying to build, again, emotional bonds and connecting with people. It's you become isolated and you sit down and you focus on things again that don't require any work. It takes work to go out and build your emotional health. It takes interaction to do that with other people. And again, socially, it's the same thing. It takes work to get out and socialize with people. Now you're getting rid of all that work and you're not growing and you're becoming, again, a person with lower and lower values or having lower and lower values because you're not focusing and working on your health. So I hope that is a good explanation, a good start to an explanation of why something like pornography, especially for men, is a very big detriment to your health and to your whole life in general.